to stand up, if you don't mind, to moderate this panel. I hope you can hear me from this microphone. Let me first send my congratulations and praises to Mohammed Noor, who spoke at my class just this past Monday. And he and the students from the Seeds of Peace will be back at Harvard Law School this coming Monday. I saw Tim Phillips somewhere, one of the, oh, there he is. Maybe he left. I saw Tim Phillips. There he is. Okay. Who will be speaking as well. So all of you are welcome. The classes are free and open to the public. And he's already introduced two of the individuals on the panel today. Let me just say a couple of words to get us started. There are distinguished people here, and I don't want people to think that the fact that we're talking about boys that we forgot about women. The reality is that we have to talk about the family and what the family means and the idea of having a 21st century family. And I'm so happy to have gotten a degree in college with honors at Stanford before coming to Harvard and working on the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review here at Harvard, been teaching for Harvard for 30 years. And I say that because it's important that people understand that those of us with these degrees didn't start there. There were people, grandparents, relatives, neighbors, friends who lifted us up to make us who we are today. And I remember, she's still alive, I remember Mrs. Bill. I don't know how my mother and father gave her this license, but she said, well, if I'm not around Junior, if you see him doing anything wrong, anywhere, you can take him and beat him right there, right? And she took that seriously. I thank God for Mrs. Bill, because there were people who made a big difference. And I think all of us have those stories, and I hope those will be told at some point. The second thing, I want to really thank my former students, both Dorian's a current student now, Dorian and Brian for the work that they've done, and also thank Ms. Austin for the remarkable job they've done putting together this conference. And you know what? It's not just something happening occasionally. This should happen annually. This is a major gathering to talk about the issues of young people growing up, and I'm glad that you have us here. And I think people like Lonnie Guinier and Susan Taylor and other people could make an incredibly valuable contribution. And so I think these kind of conversations can happen frequently. And Muhammad called me Ogletree. I've been called worse things. The name is Ogletree. But I remember my favorite professor from first year law school, Milton Katz, my torch professor. And I came back from being a student in the 70s to being on the faculty in the 80s. And he was retired, and I just remember talking to him about my days as a student. And he told everybody, I'm so proud of, he called me Charlie. I don't go by Charlie, but he called me Charlie. And he called me Charlie Oglethorpe. This is about respect. And so until he died, I was Charlie Oglethorpe. And I always, yes, sir, I'm Charlie Oglethorpe. You have to respect and understand seniors sometimes they get it wrong. And even though Muhammad's only a junior in high school, this young man is going to be a leader. There's no question about that in our community. I want to talk a little bit about this because I have taught a lot of classes at Harvard, and my focus when I first started teaching 30 years ago was on criminal law, ethics, and the trial advocacy workshop, teaching people how to be lawyers in civil or criminal law, wherever they decided to pursue. And now I have a totally different set of classes, Revitalizing American Cities, which Mohammed Noor and other people, Mr. Phillips and other people came to those classes as well. And why am I teaching classes like Revitalizing American Cities? That's where it is. Our students aren't going to be working, many of them, at law firms. They're going to be working at public interest organizations, which is a good thing. They're going to be trying to save these opportunities. They're going to be working with young black men like here as mentors. And there are dozens of schools in and around Cambridge where students now are mentors as well. And the reality, what I'm saying is something that I think has been said today, but it's even more significant is this, is that if you think about how much we benefited from our parents being involved in shootings, beatings, jailings, losing their lives, being whipped, being all these types of issues in the early 1900s, in the early 20th century. If you think about Dr. King, who had a nonviolent strategy, the whole idea is that I'm going to turn the other cheek no matter what. And even I, as a young kid, said, well, you know, I'm not sure that's the right thing. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, but he was right. He was right. Don't fight. Prove that you have the right position. And I think that's what has led to where we are now. And that's why teaching now, the whole issue is not teaching about business and corporations. Those are important taxes, those are important classes. Contracts, torts, property, all those things are very important. But the whole idea about cities is important. Because cities are changing. A lot of us can't live in the places, us that aren't here, can't live in the places that we were born, can't own houses in the places that we were born, can't own houses in the places that we had for a long time, can't go back to the public housing because it's been, in a sense, taken down and replaced by condos. And that's in every city, whether it's Boston, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles. You go around and you can see America has changed dramatically in terms of what it means now. And gentrification, as I talk to the students, is not an issue about race, it's about class. There are people who look like us, who are black and brown, who don't want to live with us, people who are black and brown but who are poor. And there are neighborhoods where people want to live very, in a sense, away from all of this. It's great to have two people who can talk about the history of this and talk about where we go from here. And what I said, where do we go from here? We go home. But before we go home, the whole idea is to think about what types of ideas can we have for gatherings like this? What can we see as takeaway points? What are some of the issues that are very important? And I'll start with Sean Dove, this sense about that. What do you want people to do? They've heard a lot of speeches, heard a lot of great ideas, saw some terrific PowerPoints. What should they do? What, in your view, can be done and should be done going forward?
So much, thank you, Dr. Ogletree. I would start with a fruitful, beautiful question that you should ask yourself. And I'm a firm believer you cannot spend a day around and in and amongst this great leadership that we had an opportunity to share without being elevated yourself. And I would say that the beautiful, fruitful question that you should ask yourself is what Dr. Ron Ferguson brought up, has to do around your North Star. And I believe that everyone has an assignment and everyone has a role and everyone has a place and a position with this work. And sometimes we got to find out where we don't fit in order to find out where we do fit. But beginning to ask that questions, why was I here today? What am I going to do? And where is it aligned with my North Star?
Thank you very much. Dr. Austin, your view about what should people take away and what should they be doing when they leave here today?
Well, Professor, it's not quite as organized and concise as Sean's, but I'm really sometimes stumped with that because someone said it, I think, on the last panel. None of these issues or questions are one size fits all.
Right.
And the diversity within the African American community is huge. It is great. And we sometimes wish not to accept it. We really don't like it. And we have an honorable reason for not liking it. We don't wish in our hearts to leave anyone behind. But in doing so, we fail to ask the hard questions. And so many things go by the board because we don't want to do it. And many times we will say racism, when racism may have absolutely nothing to do with it. For me, the last part today was very good. I left some things out of my speech because it was too long. And one of those was we need to have just a workshop on fact and fiction. Just that. 2 or 3 days on fact and fiction. Because we need to get the story straight. And the story is not the same for everyone. It is very different. I mean, there are people whose families, black people, have been educated for 5 and 6 generations. Why not say that? What's wrong with that? Then there's some of us who just got there. Nothing wrong with that. The point is, we must discuss fact from fiction. The narrative has to be rebuilt, but it has to be, I think, and I think we got this from some speakers, and we did not get it from others, because that is what dialogue is about. We don't all agree. Isn't that wonderful? That we don't have to all agree. We just have to talk about it, discuss it, and see where we want to go. It is, for me, that one thing. Let's have a time when we can talk about what is fact and what is fiction, and then build the narratives going forward for not only these young men, but for us. Because we can't teach our young people anything if we don't know ourselves and if we have it all wrong. So that would be my takeaway.
And let me, I'm going to respond to the questions as well, particularly for the young men here who are here from a variety of places. I think that this may sound complicated, but whatever you decide to do, you have to find your comfort zone. So what is he talking about? Find your comfort zone. What are you comfortable doing? Talking, drawing, writing, running, collaborating, acting independently. All those things are important. And I say it's important because I am blessed that you guys are here today. I really am. And what is it, what's the big idea about young people? Well, right today, you should know this, and I'm sure you're hearing it in school. We have as many dropouts in our system today as we've had ever before. And why are people dropping out? The whole idea is that we've solved that problem. But you know people every day who are dropping out, and they're dropping out, particularly black males, out of high school. They're stopping, and they have a whole series of reasons, and not because they didn't do academically well. They just said, you know what, all I'm going to do is get a job. I can go get a job now. Well, they can't get the job that my father or grandfather or your parents got, or your parents got. It's very hard for people to find those jobs now. And I'm hoping that people will stay in school. And I think we have to make school relevant. And one of the things that we're hoping to do, we're here at the Ed School at Harvard, but I think it's very important to think about how important it is to understand the whole issue of education, how critical it is to your success. We can tell you, you can't survive without it. You can't. And it doesn't matter what kind of a student you are, but the idea that you're diligent is going to make an enormous amount of difference in your ability to be successful. There are schools here in Cambridge, there are schools in Boston, there are schools all around. And I just see, particularly African-American boys dropping out saying, I'm just tired of school. And it just breaks my heart, because I was tired of school too. I was a troublemaker too, and I had to find my comfort zone, and it was reading. And yours may be something different. It was reading books. And the one thing that was great that you don't have that I had, we had libraries all around. You can check out, 20 books. And the whole idea was important. And you'll learn things too, things that are important. I'm not saying you should say this to your parents or your grandparents. I did. And I just want to share one idea. I love reading books. And every time I would be reading books, I learned how to read in the dark, right? They turned the lights out, go to bed, and I kept reading, right? And my mother and grandmother, boy, go to bed, turn the light out. We don't want you reading books because you're going to go blind. I said, yes, Mom, yes, Nana, from my grandmother. And they left, the lights were turned out, right? And I just kept reading. And what I wanted to say is that, ladies, I know you're my mom and my grandmother, but you won't go blind from reading in the dark. I know that because I read about that, right? You won't go blind. You young men know what I'm talking about, right? And so there is a resistance, but I did it in a way that they weren't in the room. They didn't hear what I had to say, right? But it was very important to try to do that. The second thing, you have to grab the hand of somebody else in the classroom who you see is not reacting to what's being taught, is bored. And that person may have a whole series of reasons for not wanting to pay attention in the math class, the reading class, whatever the class may be. It may be that person was assaulted the night before. That person didn't eat the morning before. That person was denied the idea of coming to school with a full belly. That person was afraid that if I come to this school, I have to walk by places where people will beat me, shoot me, maybe even kill me. Those are real things that we didn't have to deal with. We had gangs, but they were very different from the gangs that you have to deal with today. And we are here for you. Every child should have a mentor. And I say that very seriously, that all of us are mentoring a lot of people. And we will mentor even more because that makes more sense. Because that's what we have to do and to make this happen. And the other thing is that I talk to my students all the time. These are students who are from the middle class, from the working class, a whole variety of students, men and women. And the whole idea is to talk to them about what they're going to do with their careers. And I have to tell you that the one thing they tell me, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I want to do public service. I want to work for the ACLU or the NAACP, or I want to go back and do all this kind of work. But then they have not 20,000, not 40,000. They have over $100,000 in debt just for going to college and going to law school. And there's no help for them. I just got a call from a parent who I know. Said, my son was just admitted to Harvard University. I am so glad. And they're asking him, asking me as his parent to pay $40,000 in tuition a year because I make $100,000. He can't pay $40,000 tuition. You say, well, wait, $40,000 is less than half. Well, it's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And that he may have to tell his son, you can't go to Harvard, not because you didn't earn the right to be there. And his son is saying, Dad, look at me, I'm the first to go to Harvard. Mm-hmm. He says, I can't afford to pay for you. And I've been contacting the administration, everybody trying to get this, some relief for this family. It is a burden that you guys have never imagined, never seen, but it's real. And so you've got to grab somebody, keep them in school, make sure that they go on, and they can get a job. The other thing is that there are people who want to work. And I was really pushing just a week ago about young people, the whole idea, you have this, the president did a wonderful job with My Brother's Keeper, and I said, Mr. President, that's a great idea. What about My Sister's Keeper? What about the young black girls who also want to work somewhere? Are you going to help them? And I was talking about that, the whole idea of women, the young girls and young boys. And I just had a program last week in New York, and the guy said, what about me? I said, excuse me, what about me, about jobs? I said, oh, no worries, sir. We'll talk about jobs for your children. He says, no, about me working. He says, I'm 46 years old. Mm-hmm. I cannot find a job. Nobody will hire me. And we know there are incredible jobs around the country, kitchens, cleaning, cooking, a whole series of options. And I think that's important, that we have to make sure that we don't focus just on children, but on parents. And he says, it's embarrassed to tell my family that I can't pay for the food, I can't pay the rent. Or a single mother who came to me and said, well, we're homeless. I said, why are you homeless? She says, because we haven't paid the rent for 4 months, and we've been expelled from the house. Think about what that means and what it means for a family. A woman's working hard, trying to take care of her children, but she can't afford to pay the rent. The rent, and think about rent, not owning, but renting a house, what it means. Things have changed in an incredible way. And I hope that your teacher who's here will bring you to class to meet some of these students who have gone through what you've gone through or going through, and who have decided that they can make it on their own, that is, go on to college, go on to law school, etc. And I don't want to push the whole idea that you have these professions. The whole idea is that there are other things that you can do. And schools have to be responsive. Colleges have to be responsive. High schools have to be responsive. What are they doing for the people who want to be a chef, who want to be an artist, who wants to drive a truck, as my father did, who wants to do something other than teach or preach, not criticizing preachers. There you go, be careful. Teach or preach or in some other way get involved in medical. So you can do things. And you can take one step at a time. Now, I'm speaking against this school here at the Ed School and at the law school. But I don't see why anyone would, in the 21st century, send their child to a university, a private university, and pay $40,000 a year when they can go to community college and pay $4,000 and still transfer them. Yep.
Is it the case that if your parents make $60,000 or less, it's a free ride out?
That's a myth.
I said this factor.
That's a myth.
That's part of the workshop.
That's why the workshop.
And you're quoting probably some information when the president first came and said, you know, we will pay for anybody under $60,000. This guy, you know, was making very little money, and the reality is that there's a whole lot of strings attached to that. Right? Now, and when it says you can go free, you can't go free. And there are a lot of students who are paying and who are suffering and who are finding that they can't go on to graduate school because their parents have to pay the debt. And they want your parents to show exactly how much they're making. And I thought my kids could go to school free, right? Yes, I'm a professor. I'll assume the tuition's free. It's less. I said, how much less? Well, 5%. 5%? I have to pay 95% for them to go to a place like this? I was convinced, there's some great state schools that you should go to, my dears, and it didn't work with my daughter or my son, right? But I think the cost is something that you have to talk about. How can you afford it? I love these students now in Florida, the students who are protesting, who have taken over the university, who took over the governor's office because they're concerned about what's happening in America. You know, we'd rather go to jail. When's the last time? I'm not urging anybody to get arrested, but right? That's Ogletree said we should get arrested. That's why we have a protest. I'm not saying that, but just think about how many parents were arrested, were involved in movements, and they didn't have food, they didn't have homes, they didn't have jobs like this, and they were pushing it. And I remember seeing the signs that I wish that we could all cover. You remember Dr. King had a wonderful march, and all these men were truck drivers, were marching with a sign that had 4 words on it: I am a man. And it just said an enormous amount about who they were and what they were doing. And that's what it's all about. I am a man. I am a woman. I am a person. And that should be something that should be respected and understood by those who are in power and who have the right to make these things happen. And finally, let me just say this, and particularly for the young men. We heard it today, we're not jealous or angry because people are thinking about entertainment and sports as their way out. It's a way up for a moment, but is it permanent? And you've got to figure out a way, what am I going to do tomorrow? And tomorrow is way after today ends, and what you're going to do to make things happen and make a big difference for you. And you've got to figure that out and realize that there are a lot of tremendous athletes who are absolutely poor, who are absolutely homeless, who've lost millions, not millions of dollars. I'm not going to say the names of people like Charles Barkley. I'm not going to mention his name, or the great center for the Los Angeles Lakers, Kareem. You just look and see how many people have hit the roof in terms of thinking that this is an answer. And how many, and a lot of those people, I'm not talking about these individuals, but a lot of people who drop out of college after a year because they get a scholarship, they get a lot of money, they get a contract in baseball or basketball or football, and then they get an injury, and there's nobody that can help them. So it's not envy, it's just what way can you make the best of your life, and when can you make the most out of these things. And so that's one of the things, trying to figure out how to think about jobs, think about family, think about futures, and I think that's going to be a big challenge. I'm going to come back to you guys now. We're going to end just a minute. One of the things that we've talked about and sort of didn't talk about it in a lot of depth, because we're talking about the whole idea of employment and things like that. I'm thinking about public safety. It's a big issue, and it's a big issue particularly in our community. We have both the victims and the accused. And one of the things that I want to say about public safety is this, that I had a disagreement with President Obama just a week ago when I was at the White House. He was talking about issues of criminal justice and what's right. And I had an argument with our Attorney General from California, Kamala Harris. I love her to death. She's a terrific person, doesn't believe in the death penalty. She's done a great job, and I think she should be president if she decides to run. She may not. But she and President Obama both thought that anybody who commits a violent crime, they have to go to jail. And said, wait a minute. One thing that we know, and that should be known about public safety, is that you have to examine why did Jerome, Jamal, Jamila, why did they commit that violent crime? You need to understand that, because a lot of times it's because they have a history of physical, of mental suppression and overwhelming mental problems that cause this. And we need to look at those things. We don't think that, we can't just think that somebody committed a bad crime because they're a bad person. It's more than that, and that's what I hope this generation will do. Well, let's look at this person and examine this person. Why did this happen? And one of the courses I teach is on The Wire. I don't know how many people watch The Wire, some episodes of The Wire, and it's very interesting. You remember there's the fourth season is about young people, and it's about schools. It's about Baltimore theoretically, but it's about any school. And you see this, all of a sudden you see one black girl jumps over and cuts another black girl, right? Now I know there's some parents who say, he was telling you about that, right? But and what's amazing, and you see a teacher come in and interrupt it and knocks the black girl with the knife against the wall and takes her outside, and she's going on. And so the students are talking about, my God, she cut that girl. And my question is that, of course she cut her, but don't we want to know why? Don't we want to know what was said about her weight, her looks? She wasn't socially acceptable. The things that make people explode and implode are what we need to examine. And those are things that happen in playgrounds all the way. And I remember my wife and I were going somewhere, and everybody in the high school, everybody was running. I said, oh, it must be a sports event. Mm-hmm. It was two girls fighting. Mm-hmm. And everybody said, I got to see this, mm-hmm. These two girls fighting. It was like a show, right? And no one thought about breaking it up. It was like, let me see it. We have to figure out a way that violence is not a part of who we are, and what we mean, what we believe in. It's very important that we challenge that. And I say that at the same time to think about going out here, public safety, and how many times young black boys in particular have been stopped. I've been stopped over and over again. I can't get a cab in New York. I cannot get a taxi cab. I wear my three-piece suit. I hold up my, Colin Powell book. I do everything trying to, say, hey, this is who I am, right? Give me a break, right? They will go by. You know who gets cabs for me in New York? White men and white women. They see me there waiting and they'll roll a cab down, open up the back door, and then say, come on, get in. And then the driver looks back. And most of the cab drivers in New York or here are people who are new immigrants to the country. Mm-hmm. What are the first thing they learn? Mm-hmm. Black people are going to kill you, rob you, rape you, take you away from your taxi cab. They learn that before we even teach it. And it tells you that immigrants come to the United States with a sense about race and ethnicity and what it means. And when you are going to, you think you have a hard time, class doesn't matter. Class doesn't matter when it comes to things like that, when you think about it. And I have to say, before I end, I had the displeasure, it was a pleasure, but I had the unfortunate circumstance of representing not just Mojo, which I did, indigent defendants in many, many years, but in 2009, representing Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. When he was in his own house, and he was placed under arrest. And for him, it was like, why is this happening to me? And my point is this is it. You never escape race. You think, but I am, do you know who I am? That's what he said. Do you know who I am? Do you know who you're messing with? And the police officers, a working class police officer from Cambridge, went to the same high school that my kids went to, and he's saying to himself, yeah, I know who you are. You're a black guy who won't come out of your house, and I'm going to have to lock you up, right? And there were no charges were dismissed, but it had something to do, because I knew the district attorney, I knew the judge, I knew I knew the police officer, I knew all those folks, which made a difference in Skip Gates' life. But he still is reeling. How could they put handcuffs on me? And the point is, because you're black, or brown, or a woman, or young, or old, or wearing a certain amount, it's amazing what happens. And that's what I talk about public safety. It's very complicated when you find those things that happen. And when I said it happened to me going to my hometown. One of the things that you get when you get as old as I am is that this was 15 years ago, I was going because they're opening up a brand new University of California at Merced. And I flew into Fresno, which is about 50 miles from Merced. And they upgraded me. They wouldn't give me a regular car that I had asked for. They gave me what do you call it, Escalade Cadillac, white. And I'm driving to my old neighborhood to see my old house, see what it looks like. And a police officer came up right behind me, put the lights on. I said, damn, what am I? I'm not speeding. I'm going 15 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. And he says, sir, license and registration. I gave him that. He says, where are you going? I said, to my old home, 1240 Home Avenue. He said, well, that's a drug-infested area. I said, well, I want to see where I lived when I was a kid, just a few blocks away. Is that okay? Yeah. And he just said, well, where'd you get the car? I said, I rented the car. Here's the papers. Here's the contract. He says, okay, so what are you here for? I said, well, I'm here. I'm going to be speaking tomorrow. Well, what are you going to be speaking about? I'm going to Merced, University of Merced. There's a new college at Merced. What are you going to talk about? I'm going to talk about racial profiling. And he looked at me like, you can go, right? But my speech the next day was about officer friendly.
Right.
And told the whole story. So all of Merced knew, right? If you dress a certain way, you drive a certain way, you go to a certain area, you're going to be treated differently because of your race, of your ethnicity, or your gender. All those things matter. And I say that to tell you that you can't escape it just because, you can live in a different neighborhood. It won't matter. And I remember before these young people were born, a lot of people know Miles, the great jazz man. And Miles made it very clear with the police. He would tell them, he says, today I'm driving my yellow Lexus. Tomorrow I'm driving my green Lexus. And the day after I'm driving my red one. So I want you guys to know, those new cars, those are my cars, right? Just in case you want to stop me, that's me. I own every single one of the cars. And I think his point was, Miles Davis was making a point, that judge me by what I do and don't judge me by what I drive. And the same thing happened to Johnny Cochran in Los Angeles. I wrote about this in the book. Johnny Cochran, my good friend, was in Los Angeles. John had a big car, and he had his kids in the back, and the police pulled him over because they were saying, driver's license. Said, oh, Mr. Cochran, it's you. We didn't know it was you. He says, well, it is me, and why did you pull me over? He says, well, driving this car, we're wondering, well, was I speeding? No. Did I cross the yellow line? No. But why did you stop me? Well, Mr. Cochran is driving the car. And it tells you that no matter where you are or what you do, you can't overcome the challenges of race. It's real. And I really want to thank you, Dorian and Brian and Ms. Austin, for the work in making this a very successful event. And if you guys want to have a closing.
If I could, Professor,
Yep.
I want to, this doesn't happen to me again. I'm going to make Sean stand up, if you don't mind. Rarely do you get the opportunity to pass the baton to someone else to pick up this work. I was so pleased when Sean and Rashid said that they were going to do this. And I must say, I questioned some of it, but I was extremely pleased. I didn't know whether they would or not, but when they came out with the report from the Council on Foundations, it was obvious they were going big time.
Yep.
And they were not playing. And I am so appreciative because you got to see today all the fantastic work that people have been doing for years, some of them without grant money. They are just doing the work. Thank you for picking it up. I look forward to working with you and with Rashid and all the rest of the young people who are now in the foundation world who can make things happen. Now, don't go there and be that foundation person that says no to everybody who comes. Never gives them a nickel. You know, there was something in my day, that's how you made your bona fide.
Right.
You could go and say, oh, no, I didn't fund those nitwits. They didn't get the money. Don't do that. So, I mean, I know you're not going to do that. You have the ability to do more. But thank you for taking this up and moving with it.
Thank you for just sowing the seeds for all of us today. God bless you, brother.
And my last thing, Professor, my wife told me that our son tweeted her and said, please tell Daddy, and after I told that awful story about him, let the people know that I am doing fine. He's doing fine. He's a dentist in Syracuse. I don't know about Syracuse, but he's a dentist in Syracuse. He has a beautiful little girl and a wife, and he's doing okay.
Great,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
and
you.
thank
My
you for
pleasure.
giving of your time today, too.
Oh, my pleasure.
I know you got to
We have, to close this out, a person who's made an incredible difference here at Harvard University. She's been very active in the issue of diversity and made it possible for events like this for us to, in a sense, appreciate the fact that people are different than, and that they have to be treated differently. And she has been a leader who has influenced the president of Harvard University, Drew Faust, and trying to think about what that means and how important it is. Because, you know, the reality is that diversity can change from generation to generation. And I heard people talking about diversity, said, diversity, oh, we have to have some of this and some of that and some of that. And I said, what about us? What about some black folks? Oh, we had them already. We tried them already. That was last century. Yeah, we have. And so the idea is that diversity still should include us because our numbers are still a challenge. And the university is comfortable at 10%. I'd love to see it at 20%, 30%. I'd love to see it grow. And I'm not, you know, trying to push Harvard over Howard or over Morehouse or any other university, but I think the reality is that I'm really glad, and I want to applaud the students here who are having the same thing we had 30 years ago in college, about diversity. They're making the issue here at Harvard, and I think that's very important. And the person who is leading that charge, no, she's not, but the person who has to address those issues and talk to the president a lot about diversity is the one who's going to speak to us now. Please welcome, if you will, Lisa Coleman.